On May 2nd, get ready to escape. Isis, Escape from Transylvania. The goddess next door and John Haynes must escape a horde of vampires on the hunt in this horror-filled Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Escape from Transylvania in paperback and e-readers this May 2nd. I was watching ABC World News last Sunday, and they had a report talking about how Tony Robbins was attacked by women in a crowd in one of his seminars for speaking against the Me Too movement. Now, when it came down to Tony Robbins, he was trying to tell women who were believing in the Me Too movement's rhetoric that if you go out here trying to be a victim as part of this Me Too movement, you're not going to grow. And I have to agree with him because when it comes down to many of the women in the Me Too movement, they want to play the role of the victim. And when you play the role of the victim, you are placing yourself in a position where you are powerless and being dictated to. And when that position, you cannot grow. And with many women who are a part of this Me Too movement, it seems like they like playing the position of the victim because they like to be in what they believe to be the position of power. And they believe that because they are getting attention from people by being a part of this Me Too movement and drudging up old memories of allegations of sexual harassment and sexual assault, they are getting this attention for making these allegations. They believe that things are positive, but things are actually negative, because when you remain, again, in the position of the victim, you are not in a position of power. You are in a position where you are being dictated to, where people are controlling your movements, and you are not empowering yourself. And this is what Tony Robbins was trying to get many women in the crowd to understand, was that if you play the role of the victim, you are not empowering yourself. And this is what's happening with many of the women in the Me Too movement. They don't want to empower themselves. They want to remain in the position of the victim. Now, Deanna Lorraine, a relationship expert, played the entire video as related to Tony Robbins' statements in its entirety. And when you take a look at the video in its entirety, you see that Tony Robbins was not attacking anyone. As a psychotherapist and a motivational speaker, he was presenting women with the viewpoint that they would have to stop playing the victim and if they wanted to take power in their lives, stop playing the victim and take responsibility for things. And when I take a look at many of the women in this Me Too movement, one of the big problems is that they don't want to take personal responsibility for their actions. Because when I take a look at many of these women, like Rose McGowan and many of these actresses who are a part of this Me Too movement, I don't see a lot of women who want to take responsibility for their part in things, because many of these women were just as complicit in their actions with men like Harvey Weinstein, and they really were not victims in many cases, because they were exchanging a quid pro quo contract, but because they have gotten older and they cannot get access to the opportunities at acting roles like they used to when they were younger, now they want to rewrite history and make themselves into victims of alleged sexual harassment and sexual assault, when in actuality they were on the casting couch or they were side pieces. And because they were on the casting couch and they were side pieces, what happened was they found out that they had a shelf life, and now that they've gotten older, those men who used to give them gifts and give them roles and give them opportunities, they have moved on to younger women. And now they want to talk about Me Too, revising the history of what went on and changing the story and changing the narrative where they are the victim. And if you remain in the victim position, again, you cannot grow as a person. You cannot change as a person. And that's what Tony Robbins was trying to get these women to understand. And that's what Deanna Lorraine was trying to get these women to understand in her video. Unfortunately, both Tony Robbins and Deanna Lorraine were both attacked by feminists. Now, when it comes down to the feminists who are part of the Me Too movement, they want to remain in this victim position because they don't want to grow. And the reason why they don't want to grow is because this is not about personal growth for them. This is not about personal change for them, because personal growth and personal change is about acknowledging the problem, acknowledging your part in the problem, and then working towards a solution. No, when it comes down to many of these feminists, they don't want to acknowledge the problem, they don't want to acknowledge their part in the problem, and they don't want to take responsibility for their part in the problem, because if they have to do that, that means they cannot get access to resources, because much of the Me Too movement is all about women using the position of the victim to get the attention of the public and to shame men at corporations into giving them cash settlements to take care of themselves in their older age. Now, many of these women who are part of this Me Too movement, what most people don't understand is most of these women are in their late 30s, their early 40s, and their prospects for marriage are slim to none. They have used their bodies up by getting involved with numerous affairs with men. Men no longer see them as attractive or desirable, and because men no longer see them as attractive or desirable, these women are desperate to find a way to take care of themselves in their old age, because they are used to using their bodies and trading on their looks, and now they can't do that anymore because many, as many in the MGTOW movement have called it, have hit the wall, and many men no longer see them as attractive. But these women, again, what really makes them unattractive is their behavior. And as I was watching the Tony Robbins video, what was sad was seeing the extremely unattractive behavior as related to their character, because that behavior as related to their character is what really turned me off seeing them. Because in most of the cases, you had Tony Robbins trying to explain logically to these women about taking personal responsibility, and as he tried to explain it to them, they got more and more emotional, and they didn't want to hear any sort of reason. And Tony Robbins, in one part of this video, was doing an exercise where he was pushing the woman to show her an example of what happens when you push people like the Me Too movement does, and how it pushes you away from people and it alienates you. But they took at it and they tried to spin it around based on emotion, saying that he was assaulting this woman. But when he was actually using a therapeutic exercise, trying to get this woman who was in the audience to understand what happens when you play the victim and you just keep pushing people. Because I know this from my own personal experience. If you are the victim for too long, people eventually, they get tired of you and they walk away from you. Because when it comes down to people, they get tired of seeing you wallow in self-pity, the way many of these feminists want women to do as part of this Me Too movement. And many men are getting tired of the women in the Me Too movement and their victim narrative, because they just sit there and they say, this stuff happened to you 20, 30, 35, 40 years ago, and you're still upset about it, and you're not seeking out any sort of counseling, any sort of mental health services. Everything is about you being a victim of these men, and then everything is about you getting access to resources. That's what the whole Me Too movement is really about, and it's really straining relationships between men and women in America and Western countries, because when men have to deal with this Me Too movement, they see a social scene that is really hostile towards them and becoming more and more hostile towards them. And that's making many more men think about joining the MGTOW philosophy and leaving women alone altogether. And Tony Robbins was trying to explain how this Me Too movement is hurting women, because I see it all over, and I saw it in many articles. Like I made a video a couple of weeks ago talking about how men were not going out here and having office romances anymore out of fear of losing their jobs. And many men are staying home and not going to the clubs and the bars out of fear of being accused of an allegation of sexual assault or sexual violence. And that's why many men are just saying, I'd rather stay home with some beers and a movie rather than deal with women in the dating scene, because if I go out here and talk to one of these women, she may then turn it around and twist it into an allegation of sexual harassment, sexual assault, or say that it was some sort of sexual violence. And that's why many men are starting to keep their distance from women in America and Western countries, because these days, when it comes down to the histrionics of the Me Too movement, almost any sort of interaction is defined as sexual harassment on the job and sexual assault or some sort of sexual violence. It could be something simple as saying hi, or something simple as walking or brushing by a woman. The woman will sit there and say, this man did something to them, when all it was a basic social interaction. And these definitions of sexual harassment and sexual assault have gotten so twisted that most men just don't know where the lines are anymore, because most women are using their emotions to define these terms and not using logic. And this is really hurting relations between men and women. And this is something that the feminists don't see as what they're doing with this Me Too movement. They are really doing damage to male-female relations in America and Western countries, because as it relates to it, again, is men do not feel safe anymore interacting with women. Men fear for their own personal safety and their own personal health and their own lives, that any sort of look at a woman can literally get them arrested. So they're saying to themselves that it's not safe to interact with women, so they're keeping their distance from these American and Western women out here, because they don't want to lose their lives and their livelihoods all for an interaction with a woman who is just caught up in her emotions. And this is what's really hurting, again, male-female relations in America and the West, because when we look at this Me Too movement, a lot of the women in it just don't see how them playing the victim may lead to them playing themselves out of an opportunity at a relationship. Because with this Me Too movement, most men are just saying they just don't want anything to do with women, because they just don't want to lose everything they worked for. And when I look at what they tried to do to Tony Robbins, it just shows me how crazy things are, because here we have a motivational speaker, a man who is all about being positive, and these women, in their obsession with being victims, tried to tear this guy apart. And what I saw there, again, reminded me a lot of what happens in the black gender war, because in the black gender war, I've seen this same type of insanity. These females who are so caught up in their victimhood continue to play the victim tape in their head over and over again, shouting the same rhetoric about no good black men, that no one can reach them. And no one can reach them because they don't want to acknowledge the problems, and they don't want to acknowledge their part in the problems, the same way the women in the Me Too movement don't want to acknowledge their part in the problem. Because many of the women in the Me Too movement, what they're doing is revising history in their minds to make it look like that they're victims. But when we take an objective look at their actions, we see clearly that they weren't victims. In many cases, they were complicit with many of these men. And because they were complicit with these men and participated in these affairs, oftentimes what happened was they got their movie roles, or they got their TV roles, or they got some money as a side piece. But what happened was, after they got too old, then these moguls decided to move, and these actors decided to move on to younger people. They knew that their hands were just as dirty as the guys, but they don't want to take responsibility for having their hands in the dirt just with the guys. And that's what's really hypocritical about this Me Too movement. They want to include themselves in the victim narrative, but they don't want to include themselves in the responsibility narrative. Now, if these women were serious about making changes, they would include themselves in the responsibility narrative. And instead of them talking about sexual harassment and sexual assault, they would be trying to tell women not to go out here and have affairs with married men or have carnal relations on the casting couch, because that's how you really stop sexual harassment and sexual assault. You direct women towards being more professional in the acting world and the entertainment world and the business world, and instead of you trying to sleep your way to the top, you try to earn your way through merit. But that's something someone does when they are motivated to be positive, like Tony Robbins is, they try to earn their way through merit because they understand that they are the only person who can take themselves to the next level. They are the only person who can push themselves to the next level. And where they go is based on their actions, not the actions of someone else. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to read some of my men's issues books, like the Simp series, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.